All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for hopping on tonight. Looking forward to our second rules webinar. See a lot of same folks who signed up for the first time, so I'm glad you're back. We're definitely going to be talking about a lot of different concepts this evening. You can see by the title, the main things we're going to talk about is the putting green is where we're going to start. Basically addressing all the things that you can and cannot do on the putting green. The putting green is one of the defined areas on the golf course, and there's specific rules relative to that area that don't apply elsewhere. A course played as it's found. This is one of the main principles of golf. We talk about playing it as it lies. So what does that really mean relative to the rules? What are you allowed to do to potentially improve the area around your ball? What are you not allowed to do? There's some exceptions to areas where actions that the player can take where improving something is not a penalty. We'll get into that. And then advice and caddies, those are part of the same rule now in the rules of golf. Advice has a very specific definition, and caddies have very specific things that they are allowed to do and not allowed to do. So that's going to be the main theme as we go through all four of these is what are you as a golfer allowed to do in all these situations? What are you not allowed to do? And where is there potential exceptions? And let me see if I can, there we go. Just a couple of reminders, please use the chat function for questions. We've had a lot of great questions through the rules webinar and the handicap webinar that we've done so far. So that makes it great. Just from an interactive standpoint, love all the questions that come through. If you are having Zoom technical support, Chris Nieto is standing by. That is his email, cnieto@ccclub.org. And we are once again going to be doing some quiz questions. I've got 4 questions lined up for everybody. The way you're going to answer that is by going to menti.com on your smartphone. And when we get to each question, there'll be a code you'll type in, and then we'll be able to see everyone's results live. The first 2 questions will have the same code, and then the second 2 questions will have a different code. I'll put that up on the screen as we get to it. Okay, first topic, the putting green. So what are you allowed to improve on the putting green? There's a lot of things that you can do on the putting green improvement-wise that you'll see when we get to course played as it's found that you're not allowed to do. So the first thing is you can remove sand or loose soil. Sand or loose soil are not, we've talked about in the past, the definition of loose impediments. Loose impediments are natural objects that are loose that we find on the golf course. Sand and loose soil uniquely are not defined as loose impediments, and you can't move them unless you're on the putting green. Note that your ball does not have to be on the putting green for any of these things that we're about to talk about on this slide. So this is about improvements you can make on the putting green regardless of the location of your ball. So when you see a player take a towel and swipe away sand that might be in their putting line, that is totally okay. If they were to get to the edge of the putting green and continue to swipe, and then now they're moving sand that's potentially on the fringe, that is a violation. So you just got to be careful. Just think in your head, red flag, if you see sand or loose soil, make sure you're on the putting green if you're touching it and if you're moving it. You can repair damage to the putting green. You can do this by using your hand, your foot, repair tool, tee, club, or any similar, the rules defined as normal equipment. Essentially, you can't pull a shovel out of your bag and try and repair something. It's just got to be part of the normal equipment that a golfer has, and it has to be without unreasonable delay. So if it's extensive damage and it's taken a long time to fix it, you're now going to be in violation of the rule. It should only take 30 seconds to complete the repair of the damage. Now, the damage to the putting green also has specific definition. So the first thing is ball marks. So you see in the picture here, we should all be fixing ball marks. It's just as a general courtesy, but within the rules, you're allowed to fix ball marks on the putting green. Just got a question. Please confirm if any of the putting green rules apply to the fringe of the green. Great question. The fringe is a different status of the putting green. So let's take the first bullet point that I just described. So ball marks, if the only time you're allowed to fix a ball mark off the putting green that might affect the lie of your ball is when that ball mark was made after your ball came to rest. So I'll give an example. Say your ball is just off the putting green, you hit first, and then the person you're playing with hits next, and they make a ball mark that's in front of your ball. That ball mark was made after your ball came to rest. Even though it's not on the putting green, you'd be allowed to fix it. That's a pretty rare case. So ball marks, spike marks, you got to make sure you're on the putting green in general before you're fixing them. Scrapes, indentations made by the flag stick or equipment, anything that happens on the putting green, you're able to fix that. Old hole plugs refer to, sometimes you'll see the outline of a cup in the grass, and that's when the groundskeeper cuts the new cup. When they pull that plug of dirt out of the ground, they put that in the old cup. And if it's fairly new, you might see that it's maybe potentially a little bit above the normal surface of the putting green, so you're not allowed to tamp that down. Animal tracks, or it does say this in the rules, hoof indentations. Not sure at Congressional we see too much of that, but it's definitely from time to time, some of these clubs, maybe not so much in this area, but they might have horses. You might get a horse running on the green. You're allowed to fix that. And then embedded objects and such as stones, acorns, or tea. That is a change as of 2019. You were not, even if something was a loose impediment, if it was firmly embedded in the putting green, you were not allowed to move it. So that is a great change. Another change is the ability to fix spike marks, which you in the old rules were not able to do. So these are all, if you think in general, you're able to fix most things now on the putting green. We're going to get into some things that you're not allowed to fix next. I got one more question that just popped up. I thought you could remove loose impediments on the course. Did you just mean you can't use a towel to remove them on the fringe? Great question. The towel example is just for sand and loose soil. So those are two items that are only, they're not really specifically loose impediments because you're only allowed to move them on the putting green. So the example relative to the towel on the fringe, if you're removing, let's say, pine needles, you wouldn't, those are loose impediments, so you can move them whether you're on the putting green or on the fringe. So you wouldn't have to worry too much about that as you're brushing them out of your way with your towel. But if you're specifically brushing sand or loose soil, you have to be careful that once you get to the edge of the putting green that you don't remove it off the putting green. Hopefully that makes sense there. Great question. Let's get into our next slide. Okay, prohibited improvements on the putting green. So you cannot repair damage resulting from normal practices for maintaining the overall conditions of the putting green. That's a mouthful for essentially saying things like aerification or grooves from vertical cutting. Verticutting is a method where the blades they create these little ridges in the ground. It's for removing thatch from the green. So things that are just normal procedures, you're not allowed to fix. So after aerification, if you're out playing, you can't take your divot tool and try and fix all the aerification holes between you and the hole because that is a normal practice for maintaining the condition of the putting green. So that does not fall under the allowed damage repair. Irrigation or rain, essentially temporary water collected on the putting green. You couldn't take your towel and damp or try and absorb that and get it out of your way. And then natural surface imperfections we're very fortunate at Congressional. We've got a great team that keeps the greens in great shape. But I was just in Florida about 2 weeks ago playing some golf, and the one of the holes had a pretty sizable bald patch. Essentially, it was just all dirt in front of me, and because that's just natural surface imperfection, I'm not allowed to fix that or do anything to repair it. And then lastly is natural wear of the hole, which you can see in the picture on the right there. So just throughout the day, let's say the cup was cut a few days prior, and there's been a lot of play, you start to see that natural wear. You're not able to do anything about that under the rules. Okay to fix ball mark in an aeration hole. I love the thinking outside the box. Yes, you can fix the ball mark to the extent that you're repairing that, because you're allowed to do that. But you can't, because you're not fixing the aerification hole at that point. You're fixing the ball mark. So as long as you're reasonably fixing the pitch mark that you made, that would be okay. But if it's just the aerification hole, you wouldn't be able to fix that. Please confirm that damage to the hole or lip of the hole may be repaired prior. Yes. So if you were to hit a shot that, let's say, hit the liner and created a jagged edge into the cup, that happens sometimes, you're allowed to fix that. But you're not allowed to fix, and I can go back to the previous slide here. Yeah, so scrapes and indentations made by a flag stick or equipment. So you would be allowed to fix stuff made by the flag stick. Someone asked, what if the cup was clearly damaged by pulling the flag out or a ball mark? You're able to fix that damage in that scenario, because that's not natural wear of the hole. That happened as an action of playing the game, as opposed to just wear and tear throughout the day. Great questions. I believe the next slide is our first trivia question here. Let's pull that slide up. All right. So again, go to menti.com, and you're going to be prompted to type in that 7-digit code. And you're going to have a chance to answer this question here. The first question is, before a stroke at a player's ball that lies just off the putting green, so he hasn't made a stroke yet, he repairs several ball marks on the putting green, but in doing so, leaves a shoe print on the putting green caused by his shoe. The shoe print contains a spike mark that damages the player's line of play on the putting green. What is the ruling? Okay, so you got to think back to all the stuff that we were able to fix that we just discussed. Part A, the player may repair the ball marks, but not the shoe print without penalty. B, the player may repair the shoe print, but, may repair the shoe print, but not the ball marks without penalty. Sorry, it's flip-flopped. And C, the player may repair the ball marks and the shoe print without penalty. So first one, they can only fix the ball mark. Second one, they can only fix the shoe print. And the third one, they can fix both without penalty. I'm going to give everyone a second to hop on to Menti and answer that. Give you about 30 seconds or so before I pull that up. So people can come up with the answer before seeing what other people have said. All right, I'm gonna pull it up. All right, overwhelmingly, the answer was C. The player may repair ball marks and shoe prints. That is correct. So I'm glad people were paying attention. I thought we were gonna throw some people off with the fact that the first part of the question says the player's ball lies off the putting green. So I'm glad you were not distracted by that. That list that we went through on that first slide, doesn't matter if your ball's on the putting green or not, you're allowed to repair both spike marks and ball marks. So nicely done, everybody. All right. Actually, sorry, I'm gonna hop back on this slide and just advance it quickly to the next question so that it'll be ready to go. Additional putting green information. I want to talk about flag stick attendance. So within the new rules, you're now allowed to putt with the flag stick remaining in the hole, but you can still either remove it before you play your shot or have the flag attended, meaning that you have someone stand next to the hole that will remove the flag once you have someone just asked related to the previous question, is a shoe print and a spike mark considered the same thing? Yes. So any sort of damage related to someone's shoe, you can now fix it. Hopefully people are lifting their feet and we're not having to deal with too much of this, but there's always going to be some jagged parts of the green that happen because of someone's foot, and you can always fix that. So great question. Good distinction there. So the key that I want to make about flag stick attendance is that you have to decide as a player before you make your shot whether you want the flag removed or not. So you couldn't say just leave the flag in, no one's near the hole, and you hit a putt and it's screaming towards the hole, and you yell at your friend, hey, can you pull it out? I think this is going in. At that point, you've already decided that you're going to leave the flag in, even though there was no verbal agreement about whether that person was going to attend the flag or not. Because they weren't standing right next to the flag, they are no longer authorized to move that flag stick once you've made your stroke. So it's important as a player to make your decision beforehand. So your options are to have the flag attended and it's going to be removed once you make your stroke. You can have it removed prior to making the stroke, or you can leave the flag in. Just need to make the decision beforehand. The ball resting against the flag stick. This is a new concept in the new rules of golf here. How we proceed is that if any part of the ball is below the putting surface, so in my picture here, you can see part of the ball is below the surface of the ground, the ball is considered hold. You don't have to do anything else. Great shot, you made it, you can pick that ball up and move on to the next tee. If no part of the ball is below the surface, the ball is played as it lies, which means that you could either tap it in with your putter without leaving the flag stick, and that would count as your next stroke, or you could pull the flag stick out, and regardless of where that ball goes, you're going to put it on the edge of the hole and you're going to tap it in for your next stroke. The old rules, what it allowed you to do was, if the ball was like it is in this picture, as the player, you could walk up to the flag stick and move the flag around and if the ball fell into the hole, it was part of your next, it counted. And if it moved outside the hole, then you would put it on the edge of the cup and putt it in for your next stroke. So it kind of takes the goofiness out of the rule of you trying to go up and just ever so slightly play with the flag stick to make sure the ball falls in instead of popping out. It's pretty unlikely, honestly, that you're going to have a scenario where the ball is leaning against the flag stick and none of it is below the surface of the ground. Like, you're going to have a pretty thick flag stick to ever have that scenario. So I think in most cases where if the ball is staying up, got a question of a COVID related question. So with our COVID ball retrievers in the hole all season long, many players have claimed that their ball was hold if it hit the flag stick and it bounced away. Is that right? Very popular question that I've been asked over the last, let's see, we opened May 7th after the shutdown. So over the last 7 or 8 months, the USGA verbiage for whether a ball should be counted as hold if it hits some sort of a COVID, whether it's a little lift or what we have, or if there's a noodle in the bottom of the cup, does it count, right? Because you got some people in your group that basically are using it as a backboard and saying as long as it touches whatever that item is, it counts, and they're just hitting the ball way too hard. And you've got other people that saying it needs to go in the cup. right? So there's got to be some middle ground. What the USGA says, and this is a guidance, this is not official ruling, is if whatever the COVID retrieval item is, if that was not there, do you think 50% of the time or more that ball would have gone in anyway? Okay, so let's use the example of congressional. We've got these hard plastic lifts. If you hit that shot 10 times and it hit that flag stick 10 times and that lift was not there, would it have gone in 5 or more times? And you and your playing partners, you have to make that distinction. Unfortunately, this is definitely a judgment call. It's not cut and dry, but that is the way to determine it. So I think mainly that's to avoid people abusing it and just trying to, again, treat it like a backboard and hit it as hard as they can and just make contact with the lift. But hopefully that answer makes sense. I've had people ask about hole-in-ones and it hit the thing and it counted, and it did it count or not? Again, I'm not gonna tell you whether you made a hole-in-one or not. I'm gonna refer you to what that guidance is from USGA. If that wasn't there, would it have gone in 50% of the time or more? And you're gonna have to make that decision. I'm not in the business of either taking or rewarding hole-in-ones, so I'm gonna leave that up to the player. That's dangerous territory. Ball overhanging the hole. So that's a slightly different scenario. The ball in this case is not touching the flag stick. It is just simply on the edge of the hole, and part of it is usually in this case leaning over the hole. So it's not touching the flag stick, but it's on the edge. The player is allowed a reasonable time to reach the hole plus 10 seconds. So the reason it says a reasonable time, because we don't know where the player is coming from, right? It could be a bunker shot and they hit a great shot and it's up against the lip. If the rule stated a specific time that the player had to take to get to the hole before the 10-second clock started, like comparing that scenario to, let's say someone hits a 3-foot putt and they leave it just short and it's on the edge, that player is going to get to the hole. The reasonable time for them to get to the hole is much shorter than the person that's off the green in the bunker. That might have to rake the bunker first and then go up. So it could be a minute for that player versus a second for the player that hit the 3-footer. So it's just the reasonable amount of time based on where the player is. And then once they get there to the cup, they're allowed an additional 10 seconds to wait and see what happens. And sometimes that ball does fall in. And if it does within the 10 seconds, then it counts as the previous stroke. If it falls in on the 11th second, it counts as the next stroke, even though the player didn't hit that ball. So it's pretty rare that the ball, and just based on what I've seen, that the ball stops and then moves again. I think the most famous example to me is Tiger in the 05 Masters when he hit the chip shot behind 16 that Nike couldn't have paid. That was a priceless Nike advertisement where the ball just stopped with the swoosh right there, and then it just, I would say it stopped for almost a second, maybe a full second, and then dropped in the hole. That was the most memorable example of that to me. I just got a question coming through. Is it reasonable to fall on your knees and cry out to the heavens for 30 seconds after leaving a 3-foot putt short? It's reasonable, but it's not reasonable for that to add to your reasonable time to get to the hole. But we've all been there. We definitely feel that pain. All right, let's move on here. We're going to now talk about course played as it is found. This relates to the lie of the ball, the area of intended stance or swing, line of play, or the relief area. So the relief area has to do with if we're taking relief from a cart path or something, the area that we're going to drop is the relief area. The lie of the ball obviously is where the ball sits on the ground. The area of intended stance or swing is where you're going to put your feet and where your club's going to go. It says intended because we all don't necessarily swing it the way we intend to swing it. And then the line of play is the direction that you intend to hit. It doesn't necessarily have to go towards the hole, right? Line of play could be, if you're in the woods, could be punching out into the fairway. The actions you're not allowed to do that affect any of those areas in that first bullet point are to move, bend, or break any growing natural objects or immovable obstructions. So trees, grass, you can't even move it out of the way. So you couldn't, if you had kind of a springy branch that was blocking your shot, you couldn't hold it back with one hand and chip it out with the other hand. Like you can't just move it out of place, or you're not allowed to move it out of place. You can't break it. You can't do anything to impede stuff that's growing. An immovable obstruction, an example of that. Trying to think of a good example because it's immovable, so you probably can't get it out of the way. I think a scenario like that, sometimes a committee will deem something an immovable obstruction, even though it might physically be movable. So that is what comes to mind with that example there. You can't move a loose impediment or a movable obstruction into position. So you can move loose impediments, but you couldn't move them into position to potentially help you, let's say, get a better stance or things of that nature. You can move them out of the way, but you can't move them into position. You can't alter the surface of the ground, meaning replacing a divot. So the example I have in the picture next to me here is, someone didn't replace a divot. That's unfortunate. Your ball's right next to it. That's probably going to bug you, but you're not allowed to put that back because that's affecting the lie of the ball in the area intended swing. So you can't make that improvement. Got an example here of a concrete permanently installed bench. Yeah, an example like that, you couldn't necessarily be able to move it, but you could. You actually, in that case, you could probably stand on it to hit your shot because it's there. Got another question. What about relief from a drainage grate? How do you determine where the relief should be? I think in that scenario, it would depend on where the drainage grate is, right? So that could be, there's drainage grates that are in the fairway. There's drainage grates that are in the woods. So it would just depend on where your ball lies. And the relief is not necessarily, I talked about this in the previous webinar, you got to pay attention to where your relief is before you just pick your ball up and drop it there, because it's nearest point of relief, not nicest point of relief. So your relief in a scenario where you've got a drainage grate in the woods could be worse off than just hitting your ball where it is. And someone said, please replace that divot after your shot. Yes, you don't want the person after you having to deal with that problem. Can't remove or press down sand or loose soil, right? We talked about that unless you're on the putting green. So this isn't anywhere else. You're not allowed to touch either of those things, and you can't remove dew, frost, or water. So you can't take that towel out and move that and try and soak up any of those things. Someone asked, in your photo, if the divot is not attached to the turf, can you move it? So great question, great distinction. So let's go back to our definitions, right? We talk about loose impediments. And so a divot, once it has officially come loose, is now a loose impediment. So if the divot is unattached and it's sitting there, then you can move it. But in this case, it is still attached. So it's gonna fall under that first bullet point under actions not allowed, or it's attached, naturally growing thing. And so great distinction. If it's a loose divot in front of your ball, feel free to pick it up. Hopefully, again, if someone makes the divot in this picture, they're going to tap it back in after their shot, so you won't have to deal with it, but it is an important distinction. Continuing here. All right, so these are exceptions to the previous slide. So this is times where improvement actions are allowed. So we can potentially improve our lie, our area of intended swing, or stance, or line of play, as long as we're doing one of these 6 things. So if we're fairly searching for our ball, we could potentially improve an area around the lie of our ball, but as long as we're doing it, we don't know our ball is there, we're trying to find our ball, we're allowed to take actions that might potentially improve things under that scenario. You can take reasonable actions to remove loose impediments. You might brush some stuff to the side, things like that. As long as it was reasonable for moving the loose impediment, that's going to be okay. Your ball can't move. And so if the ball moves when you're removing loose impediments, then you're going to be penalized. But if you cause improvements to the area around the ball, as long as you're doing it reasonably when you're moving a loose impediment, that's going to be okay. Reasonable actions to mark the ball. You can ground the club lightly in front of or behind your ball. The exception there is if you're in a sandy area outside of a bunker, obviously, because we can't ground our club in a bunker. If you're in a sandy area outside of a bunker, you can't you got to make sure you're not firmly placing the club down behind the ball, because that could improve it. You can firmly place your feet in taking a stance, or fairly taking a stance. It must be in the least intrusive way. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what does least intrusive mean. Just got a question pop up. Your ball is lying in the fairway. Are you allowed to press the grass down behind the ball before hitting your shot? Okay, so we're going to address that from this list here. So you are allowed to ground your club lightly in front of or directly behind the ball. Okay. You cannot firmly press the club behind the ball in an attempt to lay that grass down. All right. All these exceptions in this list are exceptions because you're doing something that is reasonable when playing the game of golf. So it is not reasonable to use your club to flatten out the grass behind your ball. It is reasonable to ground your club behind the ball. So the rules allow you to do that. They do not allow you to go beyond that and flatten the grass. So if the grass flattens as a result of grounding the club lightly, you're not going to be penalized. But if you're purposely trying to lay the grass down with your club, then you are going to be penalized. Good question. Good distinction there. Is digging your feet in a bunker to get a more stable stance considered to fairly taking your stance? So there's this concept of building a stance versus fairly taking a stance. You are allowed to firmly place your feet and dig in a bunker. What you couldn't do is the concept of building a stance is basically to move sand in a way that beyond what's reasonable, essentially. So you go to hit your shot, you dig your feet in, you kind of do that twist motion with your feet to get yourself more firmly set, that's fine. You start kicking sand around and moving sand beyond what the normal action that we think of when you get into a bunker, then it's possible that you're going to be doing what beyond what is reasonable for fairly taking your stance. So just in general, when you're in a bunker, just try and, I would say, twist your feet back and forth. If your feet are coming up as you're trying to get a better stance, it's possible that you're going beyond what is reasonable. Great questions. When can you lift the ball to identify in the rough? The player always has the right to identify their golf ball. It's in stroke play, it's a 2-stroke penalty if you hit the wrong ball. In match play, it's a loss of hole penalty if you hit the wrong ball. So we want to make sure that player knows that ball is his or hers. So if you can't tell based on the lie of the ball that it's your ball, hopefully you've got a mark on the ball. In general, it is good etiquette to tell the people you're playing with, I'm gonna mark this and check it to make sure it's mine. You don't have to do that based on the rules, but just in general, it's a good idea to make sure people understand what you're doing is above board. So you're going to put that tee next to the ball, pick it up. You see your smiley face that you wrote on there. You know it's yours. You're going to put it back, take your tee, and play on. So regardless of where your ball is, you can always check it to make sure it's yours. You can always mark it and pick it up because, again, the penalty for hitting a wrong ball is pretty penal. So the rules want to make sure that you're hitting the right one. Oh, sorry. Before I get back to that question, I wanted to talk more about fairly taking your stance in the least intrusive way. What does that mean? I'll give an example. Say your ball is in amongst kind of a bushy area. There's some branches around you. It's not possible for you to get in there without moving stuff around, right? The rules are going to allow you to get in there and fairly take your stance, but they're very specific in this language about least intrusive. The rule of thumb that I give to think in terms of making sure you're being least intrusive is to think about if you were to put your hands in your pockets and slowly move into the area and then take your stance, that's going to be most likely the least intrusive. Like you want to move things around as little as possible. That's the general rule of thumb. So again, you're allowed to move stuff as long as you're fairly taking your stance, but you got to do it as carefully as possible to make sure you're not in violation of this rule. All right, got our next Menti question here. Same code as before. Question: a small stone lies near a player's ball in a bunker. The player carefully lifts the stone, but amount of sand is removed and conditions affecting the stroke are improved. What is the ruling? A, there is no penalty if the actions taken to lift the stone are reasonable. B, there is no penalty if the amount of sand is replaced. And C, the player gets the general penalty regardless of whether the sand is replaced. I'll give you 30 seconds to answer that, pull that up, and then we will see what everybody said here. This will be the last question with that 7-digit code. The third and fourth questions are going to have a different code, so you're going to have to probably refresh your page and type in the new code for the next set of questions. I know last time we did this, some people didn't get that second code, so just want to make sure everyone gets a chance to answer that next question. Let's go and see. All right, so overwhelmingly, everyone answered A, there is no penalty if the action taken, if it's reasonable actions taken to lift the stone. That is correct. All right, so we go back to our so we can things that we can't do, right? It says that we can't move a loose impediment. Or sorry, let me move over here. I'm on the wrong page. Improvements that are allowed, taking reasonable actions to remove loose impediments. So we know that a stone is a natural object. We can move it. And even though we maybe moved a little sand, as long as the action was reasonable for getting that rock out of the way, we're going to be okay. So great job, everyone, on that. All right, the next topic is advice. Advice is defined as any verbal comment or action that is intended to influence a player in choosing a club, making a stroke, or deciding how to play during a hole or round. I just want to clarify there that it's intended to influence somebody, whether it's intended to help them or hurt them, right? So if you're saying misleading information, you shouldn't be doing that. But if you're trying to do some gamesmanship and say you hit a 9-iron and you really hit a pitching wedge, that information is attempted to hurt the person you're playing with, not help them. It doesn't matter because advice just says anything that's meant to influence. So I just want to make that clear. It's not about helping the person. It's about saying stuff that will influence their play. Public information such as locations of things on the course, like penalty areas or bunkers, the green, the distance from one point to another, or the rules are not considered advice. So you're playing in a tournament, it's individual stroke play. You've never played there before. You can ask the people you're playing with, is there a bunker on this hole? Right? That's public information. It's the locations of things on the course. And they can tell you yes or no. That's not information that's influencing your stroke. That's just what the rules define as public information. The distance from one point to another. You forgot your rangefinder in your car. You can borrow your range, or you can ask someone in your group to shoot and tell you how far away you are from the hole, because that's just distance from one point to another. And asking the rules. Your ball's on the cart path. You're not exactly sure what to do. You look to the person you're playing with and say, do you know the rule here? Like, what am I supposed to do? Even though what they tell you is going to influence how you proceed next, it's about the rules of golf. So that is not considered advice. During a round, you must not give or ask advice to anyone except for I think I have a typo here. So a player must not give or ask advice to anyone except his or her partner or caddy. So your partner and your caddy, partner would be specifically in 4-ball, stroke play, or match play. They would be able to give you advice. No one else can give you advice while you're playing. Other points of assistance, pointing out a line of play anywhere except the putting green. The player can actually have any person go stand on the line of play to indicate its location as long as they move before the stroke is made. So the first time I read this, I thought, how is that not advice if you just have someone go up and stand? You just have to be specific in how you ask the person. Say, can you go stand where the green is? Okay, can you go stand where that in line with that bunker? As long as it's not, hey, can you go up there and stand where you think I should hit my next shot? You're allowed to do that as long as they then move out of the way before you hit your shot. You can also have an object sit down on the course as long as that object's then moved before you make the stroke. So you can't use something to aim at, but you can go put your towel, let's say you're playing by yourself and you can go put your towel up at a spot so you can go back to your ball and get a sense of, okay, where am I trying to hit it? Go pick your towel back up and then hit your shot, and you're going to be okay there. Pointing out a line of play on the putting green. All right. So the first thing I just talked about was anywhere but the putting green. On the putting green, only the player or the caddy can stand on the line of play. And you are not allowed to set down an object to indicate line of play on the putting green. So it's essentially the opposite of the first two bullet points. Remember, on the putting green, a whole different set of rules. So you can only have yourself or your caddy point out your line of play, or if a partner, let's say, in 4-ball, stroke play, or match play. And I can't go set a water bottle down on the putting green and then go walk to my putt, look at the water bottle, go pick that ball up. And once I've set that bottle down, I'm now in breach of that rule if I'm on the putting green. Just had a question come through. Can a caddy touch the intended line of play on the putting green at any time? Yes, great question. That is a new development as of 2019. You used to not be able to touch your line of play on the putting green. You now can touch it. So the caddy can go out, stick their finger down, touch and say, hit it here, touch the ground. There's going to be no penalty there. You can't set down objects to help you in taking a stance. So an example of this, and this is also a change, you used to be able to, let's say I'm standing behind my ball, I picked out where I want to hit it. I placed my club down on the ground to give me a sense of how I need to place my feet. I go and put my feet in place, and then I pick the club up and hit the shot. That is no longer allowed under the rules. So as soon as you put that object down to help you, you're now in violation of the rule. There's now restrictions on the player standing behind the ball to help you line up. I'm going to talk in more detail about that under the caddy part, so I'm going to put a pin in that for now. And then the last bullet point here is physical help and protection from the elements. So caddy or the player can receive assistance from the caddy as long, let's say, I give an example, if it's raining, you got an umbrella, the caddy can hold the umbrella over the player until they're ready to make their stroke, and then they have to move the umbrella. However, if the player's holding the umbrella, then they don't need to move it. So let's say you have a short 2-foot putt. You could hold on to that umbrella yourself and putt with one hand. A little risky putting with one hand, but as long as just the player's doing it, you're going to be allowed to do that under the rules. Got another question here. After the player strikes his putt, can you get behind the line to watch how the ball rolls? The answer to that is yes. So you're not allowed to stand behind the line of play while a player is setting up for or making a stroke. But as you know, you'll see it on TV sometimes with guys have similar putts. First person will putt, and the next person after they putt will come up and watch where that ball goes. If the caddy uses the flag stick to point out the line of putt and touches the green, is that okay? Yes, that is okay. And if they were to accidentally scrape the putting green, you would be able to fix that scrape as well, related back to that first slide. Good questions. All right. Sometimes there we go. Sometimes it gets a little sticky between slides here. We've got our third Menti question. Again, this is a new code at the top, so you're going to have to enter that new code before you answer the question. Which of the following is not advice? So 2 of these options are advice, and 1 of them is not. I'm trying to figure out which one that is. A player makes a statement regarding club selection that was purposely misleading and intended to be overheard by another player who had a similar stroke. B, after making a stroke, a player says, I should have used a 5-iron to another player in the group that has yet to play onto the green, but not intending to influence his or her play. C, while a player is setting up to hit his or her shot over a large penalty area filled with water, another player in the group comments, you know the wind is in your face and it's 250 yards to carry that water. All right, 2 of those are advice and 1 of them is not. Which one is it? I'm going to give you another 20 seconds here to answer. I've got a question as it relates to the slide we just talked about, but I'm going to answer it after the Menti question here. So another 5 seconds to answer this question. Someone just said that code is not working. Let's see. Maybe I screwed it up here. It should be 8517470 should be the new code. If that's not working, then we can just keep chugging along on the presentation. I'll just do the last 2. Oh, looks like we got some people answering now. Just give you guys another second. Hopefully, if it doesn't work, we'll just keep going. Sorry, technology is only great when it works. All right, we've got some new people. Did I, you know what? I never updated that's the problem. I think it's the wrong code. There you go. All right, we've had 5 people answer. We'll wait another second here. All right, so we've had 8 people answer. So the correct answer is B, which we do have the majority of people have answered. The first one, again, I mentioned that in the first slide about advice, that it doesn't matter if you're trying to help or hurt somebody. If you're trying to influence their play, then it's going to be advice. So that is advice. The second one, the verbiage there is that they say it to another player who hasn't teed off. but not intending to influence their play. So I just said it, should have hit 5-iron there. Not they're more talking to themselves than anything. They weren't saying it to help that other person out. And then the last one is that the player's setting up to hit the shot, and someone says, you know, the wind's in your face, and it's 250 yards to carry that water. Like that. That's a very we've all had people ask us that question who know our golf games and know we probably can't pull that shot off. But that question is providing information that is clearly going to influence how that player is going to hit the next shot. Got a couple questions here before I jump up. That's what it was. The code, I was 1 digit off. Thank you, Scott Bergson, for helping me out with that. Had a question. If you take 2 clubs from the cart to hit on a fairway shot and you lay one of the clubs behind you and it just so happens to be parallel with your line, is that considered a violation? So if that just happens, like let's say you just were to toss the second club and it just happens to land in a place that is parallel to where you're trying to hit, you are not going to be in violation of that rule. It's very much about the intention. You can't use the club to assist you. So if you are actively using that second club to help you line up, you are in violation of that rule. Good question there. There's a lot of stuff within the rules that have to do with the player's intention. Do you get a penalty for giving advice? Yes. So you are penalized whether if you give advice or if you ask for advice. So if I'm a player and I give advice to somebody, they didn't ask for it, I'm going to be penalized. They are not. If they ask me for advice and I give it to them, then we're both going to be penalized. Okay, so it goes either direction. And what is the penalty for giving advice? It is the general penalty, which the general penalty is 2 strokes in stroke play and loss of hole in match play. Good questions. That's why it's better just have a good caddy with you. Just rely on them, and you don't have to worry about whether you're going to be in violation of getting advice. Let's go. We're going to, speaking of that, caddies. That's our last topic here. So there's 3 different things I'm going to address. Things that the caddies are always allowed to do, things that the caddies are allowed to do with authorization from the player, and then things that the caddies are not allowed to do. So the first slide here obviously is actions that are always allowed. So the player does not have to give the caddy specific direction about these things. The caddy is just allowed to proceed with all of these actions. So obviously one of the primary things that the caddy does is carry the player's clubs and equipment. They can search for the player's ball. One caveat I'll add to this. So once you begin search for your ball, you have 3 minutes. And if you don't find the ball in that after 3 minutes, your ball is officially lost, whether you find it afterwards or not. Your caddy, the clock starts if it's you or your caddy looking for the ball. So it's something to keep in mind. Let's say your caddy's out for caddying. Once they go to start looking for your ball, that's the clock started. You may not get to him or her in 3 minutes. So if you're playing in a tournament and the caddy starts, you think they might have a tough time looking for the ball, I would just ask them to wait until you get there before you start looking. Otherwise, that clock is going to start. They can give you information and advice. They can smooth bunkers and other actions for care of the course. They can remove sand and loose soil and repair damage on the putting green. All right, those are the things that we can do on the putting green. We can't do them anywhere else. They can remove or attend the flagstick, mark the spot of the ball, and replace it on the putting green. That's a change since 2019. So the caddy can now just go mark the ball, clean it, put it back, and go on their way. And they can remove loose impediments and movable obstructions. So the caddy can do a lot of stuff. Caddy cleaning the ball only on the green or anywhere. So the caddy can clean the ball on the putting green. They can just go, you're allowed to clean your ball. You can mark it, you can pick it up, you can clean your ball. There's very few scenarios other than the putting green where you're allowed to clean your ball without penalty, except when you're taking relief from something. right? So I'll give you a couple examples where you're not allowed to clean the ball. And in this case, either the player or the caddy is not allowed to clean the ball. If you're marking the ball to identify it, make sure it's yours, you can't clean it. If you're marking it to see if there's damage to the ball, you're not allowed to clean it. And if you're marking it to move it out of the way, let's say it's in another player's way, if you're not on the putting green, you can't clean the ball. You got to hold it out and make sure that it doesn't get cleaned. But if the player is allowed to clean the ball in any scenario, the caddy is also allowed to clean the ball. Those are synonymous with each other. All right, let's get into the next slide here. So this is actions allowed only with player authorization. First one is restoring conditions that are worsened after the player's ball comes to rest. An example of that would be, thinking back to the last rules webinar, where if someone were to run over, not you, but if, let's say, another player were to run over your ball in a golf cart, and that ball is now plugged in the ground, you're able to restore the worsened condition. The player could give the caddy authorization to restore those conditions. It doesn't just have to be the player. And then lift the player's ball under a rule requiring it to be replaced, or after the player has decided to take relief when the ball lies anywhere except for the putting green. So when the ball is on the putting green, the caddy can just go up, mark it, and replace it. Don't have to get authorization. But if, like the examples I just gave, let's say we're trying to figure out if it's our ball, the caddy could pick it up to see if it's the player's ball, but only after receiving instruction from the player. They can't just do that on their own. What if the caddy marks the ball, cleans it, and gives the ball to the player, doesn't replace it on the putting green? You getting ahead of me a little bit here. Not really, but on the next slide is actions that are not allowed. So one of those is that the caddy can't replace the ball unless the caddy lifted the ball. So the caddy's allowed to mark the ball and just toss it to the player. If the caddy marks the ball, they do not have to be the one replacing it. And they can only replace it when they are the one that lifted it. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. The actions that are not allowed, caddies cannot concede the stroke the whole of the match. That has to come from the player or the partner. They cannot deliberately stand on or close to an extension of the line of play behind the player's ball when the player begins taking a stance. So I've got this picture here, and this is a change as of 2019. You saw it a lot in college, not in college, you don't have caddies in college, but in amateur events, very popular on the LPGA tour, some on the PGA tour, where the caddy would stand behind the player as they took their stance and confirm that they were lined up correctly and then move out of the way. Caddies are no longer allowed to do that. So you can see in the picture on the right, the caddy standing on the line of play as the player, see, they haven't even lined up already. They're just beginning to take their stance. As soon as they begin to take their stance, they are in violation of that rule. That's the general penalty. So what they need to do is, the picture on the left, stand off to the side as the player begins to take their stance. There is a way, if you're on the putting green and you begin to take your stance and the caddy is there, you can start the process over. The caddy can move out of the way, and then you can take your stance on your own, and you're not going to be penalized. But if you're anywhere else on the golf course besides the putting green and the caddy's on the extension of your line of play, and as soon as you go to make, you don't even have to finish taking your stance. As long as you begin the action of taking your stance, you're going to be penalized. So that was a big adjustment for a lot of players that, but also club players, who like that reassurance that they're lined up correctly, can no longer get that from the caddy. The rules have determined that lining up is something that is a skill that the player needs to do on their own. All right, and then you can't replace the ball unless the caddy had lifted or moved the ball. The player cannot drop or place the ball in a relief area. So an example would be taking relief from a cart path. we've determined our relief area. We're going to drop it. It's got to be the player dropping the ball. Can't be the caddy. And the player or the caddy cannot decide to take relief under a rule. So they can't pick the ball up from the cart path, and or they can't make that decision. The player, they can do it if the player says, "Hey, I'm going to take relief. Can you pick that ball up on the cart path?" Then they can pick it up, but they can't be the one to say, "We are going to take relief from this cart path." That decision has got to come from the player. All right, last Menti question, and again, my mistake. It is a 885, not 84 for that code. So it's 8517470. Last question is, which of the following is false regarding when a player has a caddy? A player may remove sand and loose soil on and repair damage to the putting green. B, a player may mark, lift, and clean the ball on the putting green without authorization. And C, a caddy may drop or place a ball in a relief area if authorized to do so. Those are our 3 questions. One of them is false. The 2 of them are true. I'm trying to find the false one. Give you a few seconds to come up with that. Oh, it's possible I didn't advance. Yeah, I got to advance to the next question. There we go. Now you're going to be able to answer it. Give everybody a minute. I think I've answered all the questions that have come through. If you have some lingering questions, please feel free to send them through. This is the last slide here, so I want to be able to make sure I answer everything for everybody. Got a couple people have answered the question. I'm going to wait one more second here. In the meantime, actually, no, I'll wait to answer the question that just came through until we get the answer here. All right, so which of the following is false regarding when a player has a caddy? Everyone, at least the overwhelming answers were correct here. C, a caddy may drop or place a ball in a relief area if authorized to do so. Player's not allowed to do that, or the caddy's not allowed to do that. The player has to be the one putting that ball back into play. So nice job, everybody. Question I had was about, someone just asked, what is the definition of embedded ball and what is the rule? I'm guessing that this has some reference to the Patrick Reed situation that happened last week, or not last week, a few weeks ago. But the definition is an embedded ball is anywhere in the general area. So the general area is defined as any part of the course that is not the tee box, the putting green, a penalty area, or a bunker, right? So the ball has to be resting below the surface of the ground in its own pitch mark. So a mark it made upon impact. And there's situations where the ball can hit, hop up in the air and bounce and land, still remain in that pitch mark. But the rule is that if your ball is in the general area, it is embedded, so it's below the surface of the ground, the dirt. You are able to get free relief as if you're on a cart path. So it's 1 club length, no nearer the hole, and you can drop in that relief area. And that it used to be that you had to drop as close as possible to the pitch mark itself, but now you get 1 club length. The next question I got is still not sure. Does the same person who marked the ball on the green have to replace the ball on the green? No. The player doesn't have to be the person that marked and picked the ball up to put it back. The caddy can only put the ball back if they picked it up in the first place. Okay. I think I got that correct. I'm just going to make sure I'm not giving you wrong information here. Let me go back here to my slides. So they can mark the spotted ball and replace it on the putting green. Yeah, they can't replace the ball unless they've lifted or moved it. So if you're on the putting green, the player doesn't have to mark and lift the ball to be able to replace it. The caddy does. So the caddy can put it back if they were the one that marked it and lifted it. If the player marked it and lifted it, the caddy cannot put the ball back. So player can replace if even if they didn't initially mark it and lift it, the caddy cannot. The caddy needs to have been the person that initially marked and lifted it to be able to be authorized to put it back. Hopefully that makes sense there. If there are any other questions, please feel free to shoot them through. That is, oh, if you ask non-caddy to mark, who needs to replace? So the player or the partner can replace the ball, but if, let's say you were in a bunker, you hit your shot up, and you're still busy raking, and there's other people that are getting ready to putt, the person who's not your player, let's say it's your opponent, could mark your ball just to speed or to get out of the way so that it's not in play anymore. They wouldn't be able to then put it back. The player would have to replace it. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Seems like everyone, for the most part, stayed on for most of the time. So hopefully that means that information was good. Unfortunately, we got some snow headed our way, so it looks like we have a little bit more time before we're going to get back out on the golf course. It's been kind of a bummer of a February after such a great start to the winter in December and January with how favorable the conditions are. We do have one more webinar. The handicap webinar is going to be next week, Wednesday, same time, 6 p.m. You can sign up on the website. We're going to be talking about some of the larger principles behind the handicap system. The last webinar was more about, I would say, the stuff that most golfers need to know, whereas we're going to get more into like how the sausage is made in terms of the system itself. And we're also going to talk in more detail about the MSGA switch from GolfNet to GIN. I know we've had a lot of questions about that, so I want to try and provide some information about what that all is. Thank you once again for tuning in. Hope everyone found it interesting and was able to take away a couple things. And have a great night, and we will see everybody soon.